Hello and welcome to another Qimage Ultimate tutorial. This one is going to be on the new raw developing features in version 2018.118. Here we have two raw images that we're going to start with, and I'm going to open the refine tool on this one first so that we can refine the raw photo. The raw refine tool opens up, and this is the default rendering of the image. And even though the default rendering looks good, I'm going to see if I can improve this some. Any default rendering that you use doesn't know what areas of the image you're most interested in, so we can tell raw refine what those areas are and refine those a bit. The first thing I'll notice is that there's some clipped clouds up here, so we start by getting our exposure how we want it. So I'm going to mark off this area of clouds and say recover highlights, and I use the magenta box here because that does auto black leveling. So I typically put a magenta box around the brightest colors in the photo, and you can see that that recovered some detail in this area. Some of the detail, like this very brightest spot up here, were clipped by the camera, so you may not be able to recover all of the information because there's nothing to recover. This is clipped by the camera. But you can be sure that this is the best you can do when you put that magenta box around that brightest highlight. Now that we've got exposure correct, the next thing I like to do is start telling the refine tool what areas of the photo I'm really interested in. And one thing that I'll notice is that I like to brighten up some of this foreground area here. This is a high dynamic range image that has both sky detail and foreground detail in the shadows, and I want to keep both of those. So the first thing I like to do is mark off an area of detail here, and I'm going to go down into the grass some so that when I mark this area off, it also captures some of the grass. And I'm going to say ODR focus, and I'll use the yellow ODR focus box. When I do that, we'll notice this area brighten here and get higher contrast. And the reason it does that is because ODR, or optimal dynamic range, will rearrange the values in here so you get the most detail possible within this box. Alright, so I've done that now, and I've got the foreground looking pretty good, but we'll notice we lost some detail in the clouds up here. That's no problem with this version because we can take this area, let's take an area like this and use a small sliver here and set our second ODR box, the white one, to the clouds. And you'll notice what happens here in the clouds where the hourglass is. The detail will come back in that area. So now I've got detail in the clouds. I've got a nice bright foreground. And the reason I created a skinny box here, or a small area, is because I just wanted to give a little bit of priority for the optimal dynamic range back into the clouds here. If I had given it a larger box like this, let's change it to a larger box. Now you'll notice that detail in the clouds come out even more, but we've darkened our foreground a bit. So with the size of these two boxes relative to one another, you can decide how much priority you want to put on these areas. So by making a skinny box like this, I can say, I just want some detail back in my clouds, but I don't want that to be a priority. I want most of the detail to be down here. And so that looks like a really great shot now. We've retained all of our cloud detail, and we've got a nice sunny bright foreground in the shadows here. The detail in the grass has come out. One thing that we'll notice is that by doing this, because we didn't include any of this brightest cloud here in our ODR boxes, it's not giving priority to that. So it blew out some of the detail in here. Well, that's no problem either, because the last step is to decide if you want to bring back any of this brightest detail that might have been clipped by what we've done with our optimal dynamic range here. And we can do that easily with the HDR slider. And what I like to do is just typically drag the slider over to about 2/3 or 3/4. And then while that builds, you can watch this area around the hourglass, and you'll see that the detail comes back in the clouds. And one great thing about the Refine tool in Qimage Ultimate is that you can compare. This A/B button here is used to compare. So you'll see the little help tip here. It says right click to set A and B to the same. So I'll right click, and now A and B are the same settings. So I can pick either one. Let's pick B, and I'll turn the HDR off. And of course these clouds are going to be clipped again because I turned HDR off. Now we can compare. So I'm going to click back and forth between A and B and watch the clouds here. There's HDR on and there's HDR off. On, off. And when we do that, we can also focus our attention inside the yellow box here. Let's see if that HDR slider affected any of our foreground colors, or did it just bring back the detail in the clouds that we were trying to bring back. So we can watch inside the yellow box and click AB, and we'll notice that it had no effect on the foreground. We still have bright colors, and the only thing it did was bring back some of the detail in the clouds up here. So that's a good workflow for dealing with your raw images in this newer version. We now have 2 ODR boxes where we can optimize our dynamic range for 2 different areas, and we can also modify those. If you right click on the cursor button here, you can right click and let's say remove ODR focus, and we'll just remove the white one, and that removes the white one, and these clouds are going to be devoid of a lot of detail now because we don't have any ODR box there. So that's how you use the tool. I'm going to get out of here now and show you one more. I'll show you this photo right here, and again this is the default rendering when it comes up. Looks pretty good. It's picked a higher fill value here automatically. But what I want to do is I'll mark the faces here because this is really what I'm interested in. I'll put an ODR focus on Madison's face here, and we'll see that that brings out detail in the face. But Carrie's face is a little bit lighter tone. So now I can make a second ODR box and put it over Carrie's face, and we'll see the detail come out in both faces. So now we have detail in both faces, and for me that's a little bit too bright, so we can always back off the fill. The automatic picked an 8 for the fill, but I think between 4 and 5 looks pretty good. Now we've got a really nice image here. And the other thing I wanted to mention here is these ODR boxes are a different color just so you can figure out which one you're moving. Like if I wanted to hone in on the face a little bit more, I think it's too big, I want to make this one smaller, I can click on yellow after I mark it off, and it'll move that yellow box. So that's the only difference between the 2 boxes. They're both ODR boxes, which will optimize the dynamic range within the boxes. And it still gives some priority to the rest of the image, but primarily in the boxes that you mark. But my point is, the yellow box is not higher priority than the white. They're both the same priority. You simply have 2 different boxes that you can work with. You're not forced to use both of them. In fact, right now I could right click on this cursor button, remove ODR focus, and I could remove the yellow one and only use the white one. So you don't have to use the yellow one first, they're just there for you to use. And now by only using the white one, I've optimized the dynamic range only on Carrie's face. So hopefully this video will be useful in showing the best workflow to work with your raw photos in Qimage Ultimate. Sliders are nice, but with this ODR tool, you can actually hone in on the areas and mark off the areas that you're interested in, rather than trying to use sliders and do it by eye. So thanks for watching, and enjoy the new Raw Refine tools.